Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move the motion that this House has considered the steel industry. Now, I just want you to imagine you're standing at a railway station in deepest rural India. You look down at the tracks on the ground and you see those immortal words, Sheffield Steel, 1895. That happened to me literally 6.5 years ago. It sent a complete shiver through my spine, a shiver of pride in what we've given to the world, what we've created, what we've achieved. 130 years those railway tracks have been there. And yet, fast forward to today, and we face what I believe is a potential catastrophe. Just take stock of where we are. I think we are within 6 to 12 months, potentially, Madam Chair, of having zero general steelmaking capacity in the United Kingdom. Just think about that. Because I fear that the blast furnaces at Scunthorpe, owned by British Steel, part of the Chinese group Jingye, are very likely to close. And that would be an absolute disaster. Steelmaking manufacturing in the United Kingdom has halved in the last 10 years or so. We would be left as a complete rump. You think about it, we'd be the only G20 nation without a blast furnace except Saudi Arabia, and the only G20 nation with no general steelmaking capacity whatsoever. I think there's a lesson in that. Maybe it's not so smart to lose all of your steelmaking capacity at a time when 71% of all steel manufactured around the world is made in blast furnaces. And even if all the electric arc furnaces that have been announced are built, which of course they won't be, even if they're all built, you'll only get to a balance in 2050 of about 50-50. The majority of all new steelmaking capacity around the world that is being built as we speak is blast furnaces. There's a reason for that. And we've got a situation here in the UK where imports of steel is soaring from the likes of China, from India, from Vietnam. Hang on, I thought we were supposed to be world leaders in steel. 66% of all steel making around the world is in nations that either have no net zero targets or that their targets are general and way, way beyond 2050. My real fear is that, given that we've now had the truth told to us, which is that electricity prices in the United Kingdom are the highest in the developed world, and the business secretary in the House of Commons the other week, he actually admitted to me that there was an issue with industrial electricity prices. That actually, these electric arc furnaces that have been promised down at Port Talbot and potentially are promised in Scunthorpe if the blast furnaces close there, they actually won't be viable, Madam Chair. And if something's not viable and you're asking a firm to invest hundreds of millions of pounds in it, they're not going to build it. And that's before the National Grid informs us that, oh, in Scunthorpe, we can't get you a grid connection for the electricity that you need to run an electric arc furnace. I mean, you genuinely couldn't make some of this stuff up. So because our electricity prices are so high, these electric arc furnaces are quite likely to be less viable than the concerns about the viability of blast furnaces. Now, 5.5 years ago, I gave a press conference in Scunthorpe when I said back then that the Conservative government should not sell British Steel to the Chinese. They ignored my advice. It won't be the first time, probably not the last. But we are where we are. We face catastrophe for 3 critical reasons. The first is, steel is of a strategic national interest, Madam Chair. Yeah. After food and water, steel is the 3rd most important component of a modern civilization. Without steel, you've got no internet, no cars, no buildings, no infrastructure, nothing. You're back to mud huts. I don't call that progress. It is strategically important to be able to make the strongest steel. And there's genuine concerns that if we have no blast furnaces, then we can't make primary steel. Now, some say that actually with new technology, with direct reduced iron, the strength of steel produced in electric arc furnaces may give or take equal what you can produce in blast furnaces. My point is, we can't take the risk. We must have that capacity. You might say, well, why not have a bit of each? A bit like my late grandmother, when faced with a choice of desserts, she said, well, have a little bit of each. Nothing wrong with that. But what you can't do is expose yourself to having nothing. Nothing worse if you like desserts than having no dessert at all. And I just take you back to 4 years ago. The middle of 2020, we nearly ran out of paracetamol. Pretty important. Why? Because it was all made in India. We made no paracetamol in the United Kingdom, and the sun wasn't shining in mid-2020, as we all remember. So it's all very well those who believe in free markets and globalizations to the detriment of everything saying, well, you can just buy it from elsewhere. But what happens if the sun's not shining? Some terrible event goes on in the world and we can't buy steel from elsewhere. That exposes us, because actually steel is strategically important. We must be able to produce it here in the UK. The second reason, Madam Chair, why I think this is a potential catastrophe facing us is the economic interest. There's a thing called the multiplier effect. If you make and manufacture things here in the United Kingdom with our own jobs, with our own money, creating wealth, that circulates around the economy. It's what I call bubble-up economics from the lowest point. You create and make things, and the money circulates around the economy. And that is a hugely powerful thing at a time when everyone's desperately talking about the need for growth. You don't get growth, Madam Chair, if you export all of your jobs and all of your money. Yes, you might buy the good and it arrives here, but you don't benefit from the multiplier effect, and therefore you lose the power of growth. Now, some will say, well, hang on, Tata, they lost lots of money over the last 10 years or so. It's not viable. Well, let's just take a look, shall we, at their losses. Leave aside the 1 in a 100-year event of 2020. Actually, cumulatively, their losses, frankly, in the overall scheme of things, relative to that multiplier effect, a decent round of drinks is actually what it is. Give or take, let's call it 100 million a year, compared to the size of our economy and the importance of that multiplier effect. I would suggest to this House, Madam Chair, that actually it is vital that we keep steel manufacturing going in a sizable way here in the United Kingdom. Not to do so would be a self-inflicted wound. And it's a wound that is driven by the obsession that the main two political parties have with net zero. That is the reality. Net zero and the increase in renewable energy capacity is directly linked to the increase in our electricity prices. It's directly linked to the fact that we are becoming ever more uncompetitive. And the Tories started it, and now with what I call the net zero zealot-in-chief, the new Secretary of State for Energy, it's being accelerated. Well, we're promised the bills will come down. They never come down. But I was at an event last week with someone who's advising the World Economic Forum, the G20 nations about renewable projects, and he admitted in a defining moment for me that without subsidies, without government interventions, renewables cannot be viable. That means, Madam Chair, by definition, they're more expensive, which means those of us who are obsessed with it in this country, the bills are not going to come down. And at some point, there will be a day of reckoning. The third reason why this is a catastrophe, Madam Chair, is what I call the community interest. We saw the devastation in the coal mining communities in the 1980s. When I've been campaigning, you still hear people talk about that. It was absolutely devastating. We've got the oil and gas industry under huge threat at the moment because of net zero. Again, devastating. Huge loss of the multiplier effect, skills disappearing, families concerned. And in Port Talbot and in Scunthorpe, you've got not thousands, you've got tens of thousands of jobs, directly and indirectly, dependent on this industry, which could literally disappear within 12 months. And it's not just the jobs, it's the families, the partners, the spouses, the wives, the children. You're then talking hundreds of thousands of people devastated by this. And these jobs, they are seriously well-paid jobs. The average value of a steel job is around about 50% more than the average salary in the local area. So it's all very well saying, well, we can retrain. But if you're currently earning up there, Madam Chair, and you retrain and all of a sudden you're earning down there, I don't call that progress. Yeah. I call that going backwards. And the truth is, this will have a devastating impact on these communities. And I actually feel that the unions have let their members down here. They've betrayed them. A year ago, I wanted to go and talk to over 1,000 steel workers in Port Talbot. I met a couple of brave union leaders in secret, in a quiet room, and I said to them, I want to talk to everybody and tell them about the madness of what's going on. But oh no, the union leaders banned me from talking to the steel workers to tell them the truth. And here we are today, thousands of jobs sacrificed on the altar of net zero in Port Talbot, and the risk in Scunthorpe, facing us just in front of us. Now, lots of people say, well, don't worry, Richard, we'll be a world leader in this stuff. Really? A world leader? I would suggest to you, Madam Chair, that the only thing that we are going to be a world leader in is naivety, is stupidity, is negligence. Because the truth is, behind our backs, literally these other countries that are making steel, growing their economies, cheap energy, they are laughing at us. They cannot believe how foolish we are being. They cannot believe that we're actually serious about this. We're actually serious about destroying some of our finest manufacturing industries. But they'll take it. They're benefiting. We're losing. And this is a disaster, an absolute disaster. So you might say, well, what can we do about it? I have a plan. Now, most of it is achievable by this government. The first thing is that the Business Secretary has promised us a new steel strategy next March. I happen to know that that strategy is basically drafted. It's basically written. A few I's, a few dots, dot some I's, cross some T's. I happen to believe, I've been told, that draft is very much there. The Minister indicates maybe I'm wrong. This is urgent. We can't wait 6 to 12 months. Can't run the risk of civil servants saying, I'm so sorry, we haven't got it done in March, it'll be the summer. I would urge the Minister and the team to say, let's get this out before Christmas. But my 5-point plan is, Madam Chair, firstly, we need to take a strategic stake in British Steel to guarantee that the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe will not close. We cannot run that risk. Because otherwise, if the electric arc furnaces are not built, we've got nothing. Niente. Zip. The second part of my plan, Madam Chair, is we need to scrap the carbon taxes and the potential carbon border adjustment mechanism. The third thing is that we need to stop the dumping of cheap imports from nations like China. And that requires, if necessary, the appropriate tariffs and protectionism. America's doing it to protect their own steel industry. We should do the same. Unbelievably, according to the House of Commons Library, who helpfully produced a 50-page report yesterday, they tell us that just 2 weeks ago, far from increasing tariffs, we've had to reduce tariffs on imported steel because Port Talbot's closed. You can't make this up. Seriously. Absolute insanity, Madam Chair, that we're now reducing tariffs in order to import steel. But with a bit of a long-term planning that should have happened under the Conservative government, You could have worked out that if you shut Port Talbot, you're short of rolled steel. What are we going to do about it? This is what's gone on. So that is the third part of my plan. The fourth part is buy British. British steel, it's the best steel in the world. The Secretary of State for Energy wants more and more wind turbines. But as I understand, not a single bit of British steel is used in all these turbines that all come from overseas. So maybe, if you want more turbines, some people do, some people don't, maybe make it a condition that we use British steel to grow our own economy with more jobs and more money. Those four things, plus the fifth of the steel treasury, they're all deliverable by this government. And that's what I urge the Minister to consider. The fifth thing we believe in, we think is the right thing to do. I accept that this is not going to happen. But frankly, if you want cheaper electricity, if you want to make us more competitive, the fastest way to do it is to scrap net zero. That will bring down prices, that will stop wasting tens of billions of pounds and stop blighting our countryside with pylons, thousands and thousands of them, including in my constituency. But the first four components of my five-point plan, this government can do and should do in order to protect our steel industry, which is absolutely strategically vital. Not to do so, Madam Chair, I believe, is negligent, frankly, to the point of criminality. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.